Hey everybody, welcome into the Ben Burnett Show and Appen Media Podcast. My guest today is none other than former Chamber of Commerce President, Alpharetta City Council member, and current state senator for District 21, Brandon Beach. Welcome in, Brandon.
Well, thanks for having me, Ben.
That was you talk a lot when I get you on the phone. So I wanted, one of the things about these podcasts that are interesting are that you get the opportunity for a half hour or 40 minutes, and I've been going through people in this community that tell their story. How you get in, what got you interested in politics, what do you do, how'd you get your start. You can leave as much in or as much out as you possibly, it's up to you.
Well, I can tell you why I got involved in community service, if you will, or public service. I grew up in New Orleans, and I remember my junior year coming back from LSU, Shell Oil Company leaving, and 10,000 jobs left New Orleans. And what I realized was the elected officials did not reinvest the lottery funds into education and did not really take care of education. And consequently, not only did we not recruit jobs to New Orleans, they fled, they left. And so when I got transferred out of business school, I got transferred to Atlanta, and I couldn't stay in New Orleans. There was no job opportunities. I made the decision after we had our two children that if Courtney and Hunter came to me and said, "Dad, I want to live in Washington, D.C. or New York or Chicago," I would support them 110%. But if they came back to me and said, "Dad, I want to come back to North Fulton, but the schools are bad, the roads are bad, there's no jobs and no opportunities," then shame on us and shame on me. So I got involved. I met a guy through our kids playing at Wills Park named Chuck Martin, and he was the mayor at the time, and he put me on as chairman of a committee to pass a bond referendum that built the police station and the Webbridge Park and part of West Side Parkway.
Yep.
And that's how I kind of got involved in that. Then he put me on the planning commission, and then I met a gentleman named Mark Burkhalter, and he encouraged me to run for city council, which I did, and we won. And I was on city council one term, and then I became president and CEO of the chamber.
So let's stop there.
So
when you sat on the planning commission, what were you just interested in land use issues? Was it an opportunity to serve? What drew you to that? Because I did the same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, you were one of the guys who made phone calls on my behalf.
no, I think the planning commission is a great place to start if you have an interest in running for city council, because you really do deal with zoning issues and so on, and you look at things before the council. And so that's why I wanted to serve on that one committee, because I had thought about running for city council, and I thought it was good prep for me to do that, and it was. So, but I was very interested in the way we grew our city. I wanted to have growth, but I wanted to be very quality growth, and I wanted to make sure we did that. And I think Alpharetta has done a great job. I mean, when you look at all the interchanges being landscaped with the help of the CID and the city partnering on that, with all the landscaping at the business facilities and so on, it gives you a good feel. And y'all have done a good job on making sure the standards are high, if you will.
I've only been there 1 year, so don't give me too much credit.
Yeah, but I mean, it is good that we have high standards, and we just have a lot to be thankful for and grateful for here up in Alpharetta and in North Fulton.
We absolutely. And so from there, after your one term, you went to work for the Chamber of Commerce as the president, correct?
Yeah, I served my last. They wanted me to resign, and I said, "No, I'm not going to put the taxpayers through a special election, and not only the problem with having a special election, but the cost of it." So I said, "I'll recuse myself if there's a conflict," and there never was a conflict. But I did agree not to run again. I became CEO of the chamber. We grew the chamber. Sonny Perdue got elected, and he put me on the GRETA board, the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. And that's kind of where I started to really get involved in transportation and transit and so on. Then Mark came to me, Burkhalter, and said, "Hey, there's an opening on DOT. I'm going to elect you to DOT." The House and the Senate elects it, and he was going to put me up for that. So I served 7 years on DOT, and now I'm going into my fourth term in the Senate I've served 6 years and going into my 7th year in the Georgia Senate, where I'm chairman of the Transportation Committee. So I've been involved through the CID and Greta in transportation for about 15 years. And that's kind of I don't want to say my specialty, but it is something that I focus on and that I've really learned a lot about.
When you sit down at the General Assembly, it's talk about what that grind is like.
Well, I mean, it's a full-time job with, it's not a full-time job.
With part-time pay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a full-time job. We're a part-time legislature. But when we're in session, you get there early in the morning and we gavel in and we have session, then we have committee meetings, and then afterwards we meet late at night sometimes. So it's a great, we have a great process, and we deliberate a lot on a lot of issues, and the state's doing really well. I mean, when you look at the state of Georgia, we have the lowest unemployment. We've had record unemployment in years. We've got a AAA bond rating. We've got $2.5 billion in the rainy day fund. We've cut taxes, fully funded QBE, which is the education formula. We have 2 universities in the top 15 in the country, Georgia and Georgia Tech. And then we have the busiest airport in the world. I mean, we have, and our port in Savannah is doing well, and that Congress Center is doing well. I mean, when you think about it, last year we hosted a national championship. In about 12 weeks, we're going to host a Super Bowl, and then next year we'll host a Final Four. And
Not on accident.
That's the trifecta, and that doesn't happen by accident. It takes work, and one of the things I'm proud of is that I don't believe government creates jobs. I believe the private sector does. And I think one of the best examples of that is the film industry in Georgia. We weren't in the film industry 15 years ago, and we decided to cut taxes and grow that business, and we did. And when we first did it, I will admit that the film companies came here, took advantage of our tax credit, and went back to California and did all the post-production and so on. But now what you're seeing is they've put roots down here. Tyler Perry's built that huge studio out of Fort McPherson.
Mac, yeah.
Fort Mac. Dan Cathy at Pinewood Studios, Screen Gems. Eagle Rock has Third Rail Studios, Eagle Rock Studios. So you've seen a lot of what I call roots being put in the ground. So we're not only filming the movies here, we're doing the post-production. It's a cradle-to-grave industry now, and we've grown jobs. And one of the reasons for that is they love our business climate, they like our climate, they like our cost of living compared to Los Angeles.
And you've got all forms of geography.
Yeah.
You've got mountains and a beach and plains, and you can literally shoot anything within 3 hours of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And they travel well, so those guys are honestly NBC Universal. I'm in my business is in the Crawford Media Building in Brookhaven, and I see somebody famous every month.
Really?
And I have.
Well, you're famous, Ben. I mean,
In fairness, they're always the second most famous person in the room. But along with that is that, I mean, you just never know. I see people from all walks of life. I can't tell you. I've seen The Rock. I mean, just go into the elevator, go to work with NBC Universal, going to do some voiceovers.
I met Vince Vaughn,
Yep.
and I just asked him, I said, how do you like filming here? He said, I love Atlanta. They say the other person that loves is Melissa McCarthy, I believe. She does a lot of films here in Atlanta. And so a lot of people love being here. And the film industry now has been an $11 billion economic impact. And again, it has put roots down and put infrastructure in place to where I think from a long-term strategy, I think we're going to continue to grow the film business. And one of the things I will tell you, I give Governor Deal a lot of credit. He started the Georgia Film Academy because we knew there were some jobs that we couldn't fill in that sector. And so we, grippers and, cameramen and the support staff for the film industry. And we've addressed that. And now these kids can go to the Georgia Film Academy, come out and make money of, $75,000, $85,000 a year with a certification from the Georgia Film Academy. So those are good jobs. And people want to be in that industry. A lot of kids, younger folks want to be in that industry.
What do you see? I don't live in these false pretenses. Living in Alpharetta and serving on a city council, you largely deal with rich man's problems. I mean, your public safety is well cared for. Your benefits are good. You have a AAA. If Georgia is the best city in the country to do business in, Alpharetta has got to be one of the top cities in the top state in the country to do business in. And so I look at the rest of the state, and I see when you go to rural parts of Georgia, north and south, what do you think drags? What do you think raises that tide down there? Do you think that it's film? What do you think needs to happen in order to see that cost of living catch up to the knowledge economy that Atlanta has?
Well, I mean, I can tell you, until we have what I call 21st century infrastructure in place down in those parts of the state, they can't compete with Alpharetta with our fiber in the ground and our small cells and our cell towers and our sensors and all the, we have all the what I call cutting edge technology infrastructure in place. And I can give you an example. Steve Gooch just in Dahlonega, right up 400, an hour away or less probably. He can't compete with us on an economic development standpoint. They have Windstream up there, and I'm not, but I mean, it just doesn't have the capacity that we have down here with all the fiber we've got in the ground. And so I think it's a catch-22 because these companies don't want to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure if there's nobody down there.
Right.
But nobody wants to go down there if they can't have those assets in place because, it used to be, the internet was a kind of a, you kind of want to have it or whatever. Now it's a definite, you have to have it.
It's a public utility.
It's a utility you have to have. If you don't, you can't compete in today's economic environment.
So we sat down as a council over the last 4 or 5 months, and Jim Gilvin was one, and we sat down with Crown Castle and Zayo and AT&T and Verizon and said, show us your playbook. We want to know where the assets are because we're going to do a 5G ordinance. And while the average person doesn't know what that means, when you can get 10 gig speeds to your mobile devices in South Georgia, that's when it changes.
Yeah.
And that day's coming. I don't know that it will be today or tomorrow, and it pays off to have dense areas that have customers that with discretionary money.
Yeah.
But that has got to be a conversation that we have, I guess, as a state, in order to to raise that tide. You can't have the average income of families up here at $85,000, $95,000, $105,000, and then you go to South Georgia and it's like, 40.
Yeah.
And it's household incomes. That's not making a disparaging comment. And I do think that this is the right state for that. The regulations that are in place are kind of few and far between. And I think you guys have done a relatively good job having that conversation. But that to me, when we have conversations around transit, that to me is transit. It's just 21st century.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Well, what do you see as a guy who's sat there as a head of the Senate Transportation Committee for a couple of years? What do you want to accomplish in the next year or two while you've got this term?
Well, I'm really focused on trying to get more freight on rail out of Savannah. Right now, coming out of the Port of Savannah, 17% of the freight comes on rail. The rest is 18-wheeler trucks. We cannot have more 18-wheeler trucks around 285 and 85 and 75 and so on. We have to figure out a way to get that freight on rail. Now, we've got a program in place with all these intermodal ports.
Yep.
And so those are working well. But our goal is to try to get the freight coming out of the port up to about 35%. If we do that, we will hopefully see some reduction on truck traffic in the metro area. Now, are we going to eliminate it all? Probably not. But if we can go from 17% to 35%, you will see some improvement on that. So we are working very hard and diligently with CSX and Norfolk Southern to work on getting freight to the Atlanta market in a pretty quick way.
And what a lifesaver for them.
Yeah, so it'd be good. And you got to realize that port is being expanded and the river's being deepened so we can take those big Pan American ships, the big containers. So they're saying the volume that will be coming out of the port could triple Now, if we triple and we're at 17% on rail and the rest is 18-wheelers, we will clog up our systems. So we want to try to work on that and work on that freight rail. That's probably the number one thing we're working on.
So let's assume we have dry ports all over the state, or is it Macon? And where does that freight come in today?
It's coming into Savannah,
And then where
obviously,
does it go?
And then it goes to Macon, and it goes to there's another one in over in Douglas. I believe it's Douglas County.
Okay, so west of Atlanta to
west
go.
of Atlanta to go. Yeah. So
what do you, if you had something that you wanted to hang your hat on? I know you're a MARTA lover. Talk to me about the ATL board and what you thought when that idea came up, and what your goals are for it. What do you see for it? What do you hope it is in 10 years?
Well, what we wanted to do is, I realized, well, if you go back, when I was on the GDOT board, the chairman asked me to be on the transit planning board, and that was out of ARC, and they were looking at regional transit. And I would go to these meetings, Ben, and I'd get so frustrated because all we would talk about is who was going to be on the board, who's going to be the chairman, who's going to elect the board, how is the federal funding going to be?
Politicians politicking.
Yeah, and it just, we never really looked at it from the customer standpoint. So I made the decision, if I had the chance, I was going to look at transit from the customer standpoint. So when I got elected to the Senate, I asked Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, could I do a study committee on regional transit? And he said, yes, do it. And so I did. And before my first study committee meeting, Ben, I took a trip from Kennesaw State to the Gwinnett Arena, 38
I remember
miles.
hearing about this.
And I had this kid from University of North Georgia film me. He was from their film school. And I paid him, and he filmed me, and he condensed it into about a 3.5-minute film. But what I learned on that trip was that even to plan my trip, I had to go to the CCT website, the MARTA website, and the Gwinnett website, and I had to try to match up when I could cross jurisdictional lines. Then I had to pay with cash. Then I had to buy a Breeze card, and then I have to pay with cash in Gwinnett. They didn't take the Breeze card. So I realized we had a very fragmented system that did not collaborate or communicate with each other. And yet, really, to be honest with you, when you looked at all three of the entities, Cobb was very efficient and very clean and very safe. MARTA was very clean and very safe that day, and so was Gwinnett. But they just had no coordination. And I said, we are never going to attract lifestyle riders if they have to go to 3 websites, pay 3 different methods of payment, and wait 4 hours to go 38 miles. It's just not going to work. Because there's 2 types of riders. You have a lifeline rider who does not have an automobile. They have to ride transit, so they're going to go to whatever lengths they have to go to get to work. Then you have the lifestyle rider like you and me that have cars. We're never going to get out of our cars if we don't make it seamless.
You have to make me want to ride it.
Yeah, you got to make it seamless, efficient, clean, and most of all safe. What the ATL does is set up a framework to where eventually you will be able to cross jurisdictional lines. If you want to go from the Gwinnett Arena area to the Cobb, to the new Brave Stadium, you'll be able to get on the purple line or the orange line, or they'll have it all. You'll go to one website, and it'll be a seamless, efficient trip where it'll get you there without stopping 100 times and making you get out and walk a couple blocks to another. What was happening is you couldn't cross jurisdictional lines in transit. It just couldn't do it. So, and we had too many fragmented systems out there.
Yeah, siloed.
So this is a framework to bring everybody together and come up with a regional plan. And the real key is by 2023, we rebrand MARTA. MARTA goes away, and it's called the ATL. So ATL will be the new brand. So you'll fly into ATL airport, get your baggage with the little ATL tag on it. You'll get on an ATL train, ATL bus, ATL express bus, ATL light rail, ATL commuter rail. Everything will be branded ATL. You have an ATL app, and that's our brand, and we're going to keep it branded like that. And I tell people all the time, they say, why is branding so important? I said, if you remember, ValueJet was about to go out of business. I mean, they were, about to close the doors. The same chairman of the board and the same board, they rebranded to AirTran, bought 3 planes, painted the rest of them, and all of a sudden they took off. Everybody wanted to fly on AirTran, and they ended up selling to Southwest and making a lot of money for their shareholders. And it was all through rebranding and a new image. I think by having a new brand and a new image, it'll help the transit operator, which MARTA's still going to be around as far as their rail. I mean, they own a lot. They own a lot of infrastructure, but I think by having that rebrand and that refresh, it'll help from a customer standpoint. Now, I will tell you this: I've told the new members of the ATL board, I said, you got to deliver now. You got to execute that experience when that rider gets on there, and they need Wi-Fi through those tunnels, and they need Wi-Fi on the train. You've got to make the customer experience good if you're going to continue to grow ridership. So I think that's a key.
What would you say to people in this community? Because as when I ran here, I would say a third of our constituents in Alpharetta, when I would knock on their door, the top 2,000 or 3,000 households here, I'm not talking all of Cherokee or Milton. Transportation was their number one issue. It was literally a third. One, that blew me away. Because you don't ever know until you start asking what's important to a voter. And I realized that there's a lot of forms and metrics around who you ask and why you ask. And just to hear that conversation, when I moved away from that, and my next question to them was, what don't you like about it? And they just said, it stops too frequently.
Yeah.
And I know when I started looking, and I've talked to the good folks at Kimley Horn who have probably studied everything there is to study with respect to rail in Atlanta, they said that there's one track north and one track south. And I was like, that was government planning at its finest. What would you say to the guy out there, the lifestyle rider? I'm convinced if you had something that started at North Point Mall, went to Buckhead, and went to the airport, you would change Atlanta. You would change North Point Mall. That area would be huge. And candidly, we offered it up when we approved a Livable Centers initiative with North Point to, hey, if we're going to have transit here and we're going to go transit-oriented development, let's do it here. To at least make the compelling case to not be naysayers moving forward. Yeah. Because for so long that was the culture here, and I feel like even though I have tremendous disagreements with you on aspects of it, you've kind of been the lone guy out there, come hell or high water, regardless of how popular it was, to say this is the right conversation to have. I'm still not necessarily married to it in the same way you are, but as you see with technology people, I'm married to successful outcomes. There's no doubt that there is some portion of what you're advocating for that is where the answer is. But how do we create that lifestyle rider?
Well, you get them from point A to point B in a seamless, efficient, again, clean and safe manner, and you make sure they can get that last mile to where their destination is, whether that's through Uber or Lyft, the Bird, or whatever these new technologies that will come out.
The Bird? Did you invent the Bird?
No, I did not. But I will tell you this, back to your question about transit as a whole. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was on that committee, and I started seeing Governor Deal take Keith Parker with him on economic development missions. And I said, why is Keith Parker going?
Keith Parker was the former CEO of MARTA.
The former CEO of MARTA, I'm sorry. And I said, wonder why he's taking him. And then the light bulb went off that these CEOs, transit's a box they have to check off now when they're looking to relocate. And I'll go back, I will tell you this, 15 years ago, the CEO made the decision of where to locate his or her company based on where he or she wanted to live. So if they wanted to live in Sugarloaf, they went to Gwinnett. If they wanted to live in Golf Club of Georgia, they came to Windward. You fast forward to today, that CEO still makes the final decision on where to relocate their company, but it's based on one thing. Where's the talent? Talent and workforce is driving everything. And the talent today wants different things. They want bike lanes. They want the belt line. They want walkability. They want Uber. They want transit. They want to have different things. And I think probably the best example of that is 12 years ago, if you would have told the Gwinnett Chamber CEO that NCR would move from Dayton, Ohio to Gwinnett County and then would turn around 12 years later and move across from Georgia Tech, where they built that new big building right off the interstate. He just said, there's no way that happens. Success lives in Gwinnett. They'll never leave.
Yeah.
But they did leave. And if you ask Bill Newt, the president and CEO of that company, why'd y'all leave Gwinnett? He said, we want to pull that talent out of Georgia Tech, and those kids in Georgia Tech want to live down there. Another example, and I know Mayor Bellow used to hate me saying this, but Athena Healthcare had 600 jobs in Alpharetta. Their employees all live down in the Virginia Highlands and on the Beltline. All their really sharp employees. And so the CEO said that they don't want to come up here anymore. They can't fight. There's no more reverse commute on Georgia 400. So he moved the company down to East Ponce Market or Ponce City Market. And that's where those employees live, and they like that lifestyle. So talent's dictating a lot of this, okay? The other thing, because of the talent, is it's a box, like I said, the CEO has to check off. I want to give you these 3 examples. I want you to think about this. Mercedes-Benz, what do? They sell automobiles. State Farm Insurance, what do they sell? Automobile insurance. Pulte Homes, what do? They build garages and their houses for automobiles. So all 3 of those companies have...
Sandy Springs, and Buckhead.
Yeah, they all have automobiles in their business model, and yet they all located near a MARTA station. I mean, State Farm actually... There's an escalator that goes down into the lobby from the MARTA station. I mean, they're connected. So, and I'm not saying everybody at State Farm's using transit, but it was something the CEO said, we're going to have this opportunity for you if you want to take transit. So,
how do you think what would you tell the people in Alpha? I realize the thing that I think is so interesting about your district is that Cherokee County, the conversation that you have with your Cherokee County voter and the conversation that you have with your Alpharetta voter are probably not the same.
No, they're very different.
How has that? How do you navigate that?
Very carefully, but I will tell you, they are very different. But they all want the same thing as far as they want. They want good education, good schools, and Cherokee has great schools. North Fulton has great schools. Cherokee, what Cherokee has that we don't have in North Fulton, they have lower taxes. Cherokee County. They've got plenty of land. They've got plenty of water. They have interstate access on 575, and now with those new reversible lanes. And also, they have a little hidden gem that we don't have. They have a little airport out there that's, taking corporate jets now. So they've really capitalized on that, and that's something that's been helping them from an economic development standpoint. But again, very, very different from I think the voters in North Fulton are a little different when it comes to transit, for example, than the voters in Cherokee. That being said, they've got a seat at the table now through this ATL, and they don't have to join. They don't have to do a 1 cent sales tax, but they've got representation now in that district that can, have a seat at the table to see what we're doing from a regional standpoint. And, but we'll see. I mean, we're investing a lot of money in Georgia 400, $1.8 billion in 2 managed lanes northbound and 2 managed lanes southbound that'll go up to McFarland Road. And then we're going to have 5 bus rapid transit stations along 400. And that's going to be a $100 million investment. That's something we put in the bill, House Bill 930, that was the bill I sponsored, me and Kevin Tanner.
Can you sponsor a House bill?
Well, I had Senate Bill 386.
He was catching it or
House
putting it
Bill
out?
983, and we combined the bills, and we combined it into House Bill 930. So, but Kevin and I both were the sponsors of the bill, and he was the sponsor in the House, I was the sponsor in the Senate, and we combined them at conference committee. But my point is, we just used his number. But my point is, one of the parts of that bill was $100 million of state money. And that's important because the state's never really invested in transit. But
it's been counties.
Yeah, so we put up $100 million, and the governor was gracious enough to put the whole $100 million into 400 and said, let's just take care of that corridor. It's an economic engine for the state, and we need to make sure they have some transit.
It got him reelected the second time.
Yep.
When he took down the toll booth. He was like, and I'm going to take down the toll booth. And everybody was like, deal.
Yeah. No, that was a commitment that was made, and we need to live up to our commitments in government.
What would you, I'm not going to sit here and only ask you softball questions. It's not a secret as I've seen Mayor Mike Bodker and Jim Gilvin talk about the ATL board and their gripes about getting split and having Johns Creek go into Gwinnett County and the western part of Alpharetta and Milton be lumped in Cherokee. So they felt like they didn't have a seat at the table. Candidly, I see their point because you made it. I'm not saying you. Alpharetta was made at gelding. It really didn't have. There was no way they were going to get voted on a committee or have a seat at the table. And for people that have sat here and paid 40 or whatever, however, one cent for 40 years.
Yeah.
I understand especially from an Alpharetta standpoint, Johns Creek was unincorporated Fulton County for 30 of those 40 years, but they were still paying in. How do you answer that question to those guys? Because it is fair to feel that they got slided. Was somebody always going to get slided, and this was how it shook out? What's that conversation like?
Well, when we drew those regions, we wanted to make sure we got all 13 counties in, okay? And we wanted to make sure, even if they didn't vote on it, we wanted to make sure counties like Paulding County or Cherokee County or Henry County had a seat at the table. So it's just the way the districts were drawn. Here's the good news for us. Andy Mackey, who's with Comcast, lives in my subdivision in Alpharetta, and he was voted on for District 1. So we do have a seat at the table from Andy Mackey as our new board member for District 1. Also, Mark Toro doesn't live here, but he's got $1 billion investment right down the street called Avalon. So he's on the board. He was appointed by the lieutenant governor.
He had an investment.
Well, but he still cares about North Fulton. Teddy Russell is got a business here, Russell Landscaping. They do all the interchanges for us at the CID. So he has a vested interest in Alpharetta, even though he lives in Buckhead. Frida Hartage is going to be the new chairman of MARTA in January. And we've got 2 other members of the MARTA board from here. And then we have, I believe, 4 or 5 members on the Greta board. Al Nash, Dick Anderson, Ann Hanlon, and you just, I'm drawing a blank, but 4 or 5 of them from North Fulton. So we have great representation on Greta. I think excellent representation now with 3 board members on MARTA and Frida Hartage being the chair. And then we have the Alpharetta person in District 1, which is the only district we could have won or we were part of, and we got that seat, which is a good seat because that seat goes all the way up to Cherokee,
Right.
and it's really a Cherokee. If you look at the population of it, it's more Cherokee than anything. But Andy was able to win that race. It was a 3-man race, and he won it, and I'm proud for him. I nominated him because he's very data driven. He looks at data.
Yeah. I mean, he was a lobbyist for Comcast.
Yeah.
And we see him. I won't say he knows who I am.
Oh no, he knows you.
That's
Ben. Everybody knows you.
well, trying to keep this humble. So let me ask you this, and we'll end here. Congressional District 6, Lucy McBath, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, Democrat from Tennessee. Any part of you that looks at that down the road and says, I could be Congressman Beach.
Well, listen, I just got reelected to the Senate, but I will tell you this. I will answer that this way. That is a Republican seat, and it should be a Republican seat. And I am convinced that when Tom Price got reelected 2 years ago, it was 62.8% Republican. It did not go Democrat, even if you give it 5 to 7 points change from a demographic standpoint. It's still 55-45 Republican. And a Republican should be in that seat, and I believe we will win it back in 2 years. We have to get the right candidate, and we have to get behind the right candidate, and we can beat Lucy McBath.
Well, I'm still waiting for all the PAC money to support my congressional race to start strolling in. But if you want to take a swing at it, you'll have to pry it from my cold, dead hands.
All right. Well, we'll see.
I was asked by somebody at the AJC if I had any interest, and I said sure, but I would need $6 million, 3 to run and 3 to pay my wife in a divorce settlement. And I thought the guy said that was really well said. and I asked Jan Jones. I'm just trying to stoke the fire to see who the first person out the gate is, and you did a good job with your coach speak. I appreciate you not answering the question. So far, I'm the only person who's still interested.
Okay, well, good.
But I wanted to thank you for stopping by. I do think it'll be a Republican seat. I think it'll be a long time to come. And I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate what you do for us in this community. And, you are living proof that I don't have to sit here and agree with somebody on absolutely everything, because no two people are that way. But I always appreciate how you choose to handle. Honestly, I appreciate how you handle the disagreements more than I appreciate the agreements, because that's where you find somebody's character.
Well, I appreciate that, and we appreciate all you do for the city and the community. We've got a great community and a great city, but that doesn't happen by accident. We got to continue to stay on top of it and keep the gas pedal down and keep moving forward.
Well, thanks, Brandon. This has been another installment of the Ben Burnett Show on the Appen Media Network. I want to thank Senator Brandon Beach for stopping by. He's a gentleman, a scholar, and if you didn't know better, you wouldn't know he went to LSU. Have a good week, everybody.
Go Tigers.